it's very possible that the secular crisis of the next civic generation is going to be this one, of the encounter with the realization that not only are we not, as Copernicus demonstrated, the physical center of the entire universe, but the fact of the matter is we're not the only sentient form of highly developed technological life in the universe. This is genuinely going to threaten to dislocate us, because even while we were dislocated from the center of the physical universe by the Copernican revolution, that we still insisted upon holding ourselves in the center of the universe as far as sentient intelligence goes. So this is a major shock to the human system that is in process.
Boom. So I wanted to kind of lead with that because Danny is a wise voice in this space, and he, I think, really summarized it well there, where this is overall a paradigm shift. And, you know, I'll throw it to you here, but today we're kind of wrapping it all kind of up and focusing on the future and sort of the implications. And we're going to dive pretty deep here with, you know, specific groups and theoretical agendas. But yeah, how you feeling?
Yeah, man, excited for this one. Excited that we've gotten this far. So for those of you who've tuned in the past few episodes, we were talking about a lot of Catherine Austin Fitz's work. Where has the money gone? How would something such as a secret space program get funded? And showed a little bit of Richard Dolan. And that was Danny Sheehan on the Thrive movement. And was that Thrive 1? Was that the film?
Yeah, that's
the
original.
Yeah, so they went deep in that film. If you guys haven't seen that film, go back and check that out. Thrive 1, Thrive 2 is also out. And but that specifically was Danny Sheehan. And what we're going to be getting into a little bit more today is kind of like wrapping up where we've come in this series, the space series. And next week we'll have Rafe Kelly for you. He is a movement specialist. And he took parkour into nature, which is something that I found him, and I trained with him a while back. But today we're going to be wrapping up this series. So Gordon, I really appreciate the way that you've solidified and kind of condensed a lot of this research. So we've been able to kind of give the audience a crash course. If you're new to this topic, it was really a smooth way to bring you into some of the players, some of their research. And we really just kind of talked about what is all this UAP phenomena that we're hearing about today. And I just saw this thing. It was on NBC News, where it's basically saying the U.S. military takes UFOs seriously. Why doesn't Silicon Valley or academia? And it's a pretty interesting article, and I won't go all the way through it, but it's basically, you know, of course, the first person they point at is Musk. And so they said, you know, Elon Musk was asked what he thought about the recent Pentagon acknowledgement of Navy pilots having seen objects flying in airspace and using advanced technology. And he basically said, honestly, I think I would know if there were aliens. And they rightly called that in this article a non-answer. That wasn't answering it directly. That was basically saying, I think I would know if there were aliens. So that's an interesting statement. And, you know, that's either keeping your mouth shut intentionally and misdirecting, or he knows something that we don't, and this is actually terrestrial, or the guy doesn't know, but he doesn't want to look like he doesn't know. So those are three things I could come up with as far as potential reasons why people like Musk and more, because they're saying Silicon Valley and academia. That's not Musk, but there are other people who follow suit with this kind of line of logic. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think Musk is tricky. I mean, for me, honestly, the most authentic in my opinion, where you see him was probably on Joe Rogan, and Joe really pushed him on this. And Joe's obviously been very open about saying that he has confirmation bias about this. But, you know, I forget his exact quote on Rogan, but he was very dismissive of it. He was very similar to this statement, just saying, you know, I would know because of SpaceX and, you know, just how much we're constantly going to the stars. You know, I don't know. I don't want to be too speculative. For me, honestly, I feel like I just think he is a very busy guy running so many different companies. And I think he hasn't really probably taken too much time to really deep dive into it. I don't think. I get that impression. It's very just surface level skepticism. and it's not like he seems like he's even really given it a chance. So I think part of it too, maybe, you know, it's similar to an academic or an engineer who their whole life's work could be overnight completely obsolete. And I think he knows the implications of this would do that for a lot of things he's involved with. And that's slightly an identity crisis. I don't know, that could be something very challenging to have to kind of accept that, wow, like I could have put in all this time and energy. You know, I don't know. You know, that's a component too, possibly. But but regardless, this is bigger than any one person. I don't care who you are. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. This is a subject and something that, when you really look into, has so many variables and things that are outside the control of just one person or even a group of very powerful people. For instance, just the massive amount of sightings that have increased over the past 50 years. It's shown how really obsolete and primitive we are when we look at the kind of tech that these things are displaying, right? The propulsion, the ability to intercept, you know, our greatest cryptographers, radar, everything we would consider top of the line security tech seems extremely obsolete to our stuff, our air fighters, everything. And so that, I'm sure if you're in a position where you're in charge of those things, could be very disconcerting and can be very unsettling to say, well, my whole job and responsibility is to keep the people safe, and this is an enemy or an ally, whatever. They're probably obviously just benefit of doubt saying it's hostile or possibly an enemy because it's an unknown. And we have nothing to really, we would be considered so obsolete. I mean, if they wanted to become hostile overtly, the craft aren't affected by our weapons. They're much faster, all these things. So it would be very, you know, put yourself in their shoes. It'd be tough. It'd be tough to really have to accept that.
Yeah, I was gonna try and look for this message that I got from somebody on Instagram, and it looks like there's just so many messages. I'm not sure which one it is, but there was a woman who reached out to me from Amsterdam, and from Australia, and it was after our last conversation where we're like, what are other countries saying about this? And it's interesting. She connected with me to say that at first they were on board doing the same thing with, you know, like there's these UAPs after the 60-minute thing. They were kind of like lockstep right behind the United States. And then all of a sudden, I forget what she said shifted. That's why I wanted to see the message. But she said all of a sudden it started shifting to the media narrative saying it was China and or Russia. And so that's not a huge peak of insight, because we know that there's just so much of this Russia and China saber rattling and kind of like fear that's been going on for quite some time. So it doesn't really answer anything, but it does at least show us what one other country is, how they're approaching this. I'm still looking into how China and Russia are speaking about this phenomena. I've reached out to a few people, so I'll let you guys know if when we get that. But I found that to be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's supposed to be a big part of the UAP hearing in June. I mean, which we're in, you know, past midway June now. Today's 24th. The hearing's supposed to be in June, so they've got technically 6 days. But this is what when you read in the details of the briefing that came out about it, it was saying that most likely be June, but they're not like forced to have it by June. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kick back the can and push it to July, but
right.
Hopefully we do get it by end of June, so that would have, you know, be 6 days. But with the big part of what Christopher Mellon and I forget somebody else who came out and was talking about the China-Russia angle was saying that this new briefing, a big part of what it probably will expose, and I wish I should get the quote, but they basically were saying it could put to rest that whole angle, that whole theory that this is China-Russia. Basically saying just the physics and propulsion component, you know, we've ruled out this being a Chinese or Russian thing because this is nothing we know of or that is close to anything man-made, essentially.
Yeah. And, you know, just in news, you know, this wasn't today, but it's recent news that off the coast of Crimea, a UK ship got within 12 miles of their waters basically, and apparently they were kind of pushing back because we know with Crimea it was kind of like relocated or kind of like repossessed, I guess. And so this is the Russian fear. They were dropping bombs right in front of the path of the boat, and the apparently the captain said that these are international waters. This is the only slip we could make it through. So that's something in recent news. I just heard Tim Pool talking about that, kind of relating it to the fourth turning. You know, are we ramping up towards, you know, at least just escalating fears between the Russia and the China thing again? So that's news that's kind of unrelated to what we're talking about today. But to dive straight in, man, what have you gathered specifically for us to look at today?
So really today we're going to be focusing a lot, pretty much the entirety, on Richard Dolan's newest book called The Alien Agendas, a speculative analysis of those visiting Earth. And just so people know, Richard Dolan, and he talks about this a lot on his show and in this book, he's a very, very, you know, scientific first kind of, I don't want to say straight laced, but he's very much like, you know, he takes it like the approach as an investigative journalist or a lawyer. He's very much based on forensics, empirical data. A lot of people argue he's one of the most, real credible researchers in the field. He's very legitimate with how he approaches work. So this book for him is a little bit out of his comfort zone, but you know, he got to a point, he says basically that the evidence became so overwhelming just from meta-analysis of experiencers or people who have been actually physically taken in one way or another on a craft, that he had to do a speculative analysis on it, and that he had to really look at it with a fine comb and sort of say, okay, there might be some differences in minutia of certain people's testimonies, but what are the overall core things that I'm hearing a lot? You know, this specific group, these specific things seen on the craft with these groups, you know, some of these key details. And as you know, as we were kind of saying, if you've listened up to this point, the other podcasts, and I highly recommend to do that before you jump into this one maybe, but it is what it is if you're here, because this one's going to be one, it can be kind of psychologically abrasive if you just jump right into this. It can be very kind of hard to take in if you haven't really looked at everything before this, the finance component, the other physical evidence component, the historical component, to see that this is logically possible, that they're here, that there are different types of groups with different agendas, and these kind of notions and theories and analysis that he'll present and we'll talk about will be more easier to accept if you've done sort of the work before this, the research before it. You know, this is sort of calculus level, deep down the rabbit hole, red pill type stuff. And you first need to understand the basic mathematics and algebra and geometry before you jumped into this. So that huge sort of caveat qualifier aside, you know, we're still going to go ham on this, and we're going to be like, look, this is what it's saying. I don't care how it sounds. I'm not here to commit you. I'm just, like we said the whole time, just giving you the puzzle pieces. You take it how you want, but this is what the majority of people are saying in these types of groups, these certain things. So, you know, I'm all about, let's just look at it honestly, with an open mind and an open heart. And the key is trying to get to the bottom of it. That's what we're about here. And, I think right now this is the best thing. This book does the best as far as like what groups, who are they, and what are they doing here, their agendas, and it doesn't go too far where it's like other certain people maybe in the field who you start to get too speculative down the line.
Yeah, and there's plenty of that. And what I like about Richard Dolan is exactly what you said. He's very meticulous. Like he tries to do his best not to make huge leaps without something to kind of back it up, verify it. And another thing I'll say is, you said that, like, you know, because this is more anecdotal, the meta-analysis that looks at that, you know, that's something that, you know, some people would use as an easy out in order not to look deeper into it. So we have to analyze our biases a little bit, because just so we're clear, I know plenty of people who have no problem taking a look at all the anecdotal evidence about DMT experiences seeing that there is a structured reality there. It's not just a distortion of this reality, that there are different kinds of beings, far more intelligent, far more powerful in this space, and that while, like you said, there's minutia that changes between testimony, just like in eyewitness testimony, because our memory is not fallible. And I have a theory with some evidence to back that up, that the whole thing about integrating a deep experience later is how you introduce it into your long-term memory. You have the experience, and then as you rehash it in your mind, even if you're rehashing it slightly differently, you're encoding the long-term memory that way. So anyway, with that being said, anecdotal evidence, we don't think that means much in the terms of science. But then why is Imperial College London doing a huge extended state DMT study? Basically, the biggest and only reason why you would do a study on extended DMT, and their best explanation is like, there are so many people that have these accounts of encountering other dimensional beings in these spaces by taking DMT. Yeah. And I want to relate this later to something that I just spent, the better part of a week with Charles Eisenstein and some good friends. And I asked him, what do you think of this, UFO, UAP phenomena? He gave a really interesting answer as to why the propulsion systems, just the feats that these crafts may be able to carry out, how it could make sense that some people see it and some people don't. Some people accept it and some people don't. And it really has to do with this idea that there is one singular objective reality and all of us see it just with slightly different faculties, right, and that slightly different colors it.
And lens.
Yeah, and he says, listen, if we're going to take anything from quantum physics, it's that one singular or objective reality is far more fluid, if there at all, in his opinion. And so we can get into that lately. But when we're talking about anecdotal evidence, I just want to say, even Imperial College London found the anecdotal evidence of trip reports of DMT users so overwhelming that they raised millions of dollars to put people in that state longer so they could catch their bearings and maybe potentially catch a conversation or have more time in the presence of some of these beings. That's what science is doing today.
Yeah.
Right. So let's just take it all with a grain of salt and open our minds.
Yeah. There's serious people studying this stuff, and there's serious people, like we said, now coming out talking about this UAP subject, from scientists to public officials to defense officials. And okay, fine. If that's what it takes for certain people to really start taking it seriously, I get it. I understand that justification. But no matter how you get there, if you're ready now to start asking the question, okay, I don't think this is Russia or China, and I do think these are actually some form of advanced intelligence, whether it's extra dimensional or just coming from a few galaxies away. The bottom line is there's an intelligence. There's probably some form of hierarchy with each group, similar to us, just way more advanced on all different levels. So Dolan, we'll jump into it now. He's going to start breaking down his analysis.
But I can tell you what I tried to do. Let me take this off here. First, I worked very hard to gather the best evidence of what is probably the most difficult phenomenon that I can think of, and that's encounter cases of people with alleged or apparent non-human entities. So that means alien abduction cases and all other types of encounters. And we all know that this is a tricky area, to say the least. It's a tricky area. So for that reason, and for a long time, I tried to avoid getting too deep into this topic, into what I thought the aliens were, what they were trying to do, and on and on. It's like I couldn't avoid it, but I also really didn't want to go deep into it. I mean, for me, I've always been a believer in sticking closely to verified facts in my writing. As any of you who have followed me, you know this. But here's the thing. There's always a need, and there's always a place for analysis that includes extrapolation and some speculation. I think that's totally valid, especially in an area like UFOs and potentially aliens, in which so much information simply is not available to us. Even now, after all these years, we're just still missing so much that we want to have. So we need to speculate if we really want to create a viable picture of what is going on, a scenario that makes sense based on the best evidence also that is available to us, all of those things.
So we just kind of covered a lot of that, and that's, we'll kind of jump to the next video here quick. But basically, he's just giving his rationale for why he did this book, because he is a very serious investigator. And, just like theoretical physics, why do we need theoretical physics to exist? Because it's important to theorize and push the experimental physics and, mechanics of engineering to try to match these theories. And so this is essentially what we're doing, but you can do it in a very scientific, serious way, which I think he did I think he did a very good job in this book doing that. So let's jump right to the next one.
What I've tried to do is identify what types of beings that people encounter, what the capabilities of those beings appear to be, how long they seem to have been here, and why they are here. And also, to the extent possible, what are their relationships to each other? That is, what are their goals, if any? Are there good guys and bad guys out there? And if so, can we identify them? Is there a long-range plan? All of these types of questions. So to do that, the first thing I tried to do was to take the long view of the interactions that people seem to have been having with these beings over many, many years, going back into ancient times. After all, if one or more group has been interacting with us for a long time, that might speak a lot toward their relationship to us. So toward that end, I actually start the book by examining a little known and definitely controversial claim that our genetics, that is human beings' genetics, were tampered with and essentially enhanced or modified roughly 40,000 years ago. Now, this is based on the evidence of something known as the D allele of a gene called the microcephalin gene. And this is a gene that controls much of human brain development. Geneticists all seem to agree that we obtained this allele quite recently in our past. They can only give a range at this point, and it's roughly on the low end of like 15,000 years, maybe 20,000 years on the low side, and up to about 60,000 years on the high side. Generally, you hear them splitting the difference and coming to 37.5 thousand years, which is right down the middle of their estimate. But it could be 30,000, it could be 45,000. You get the idea. So one thing about this allele, the geneticists all agree that our species acquired it from an outside source, from an external source. So that is, it came through interbreeding. I don't know how or why they argue this, but that seems to be a settled issue for them. So, okay. The question then is, who's the daddy? So most people would assume it's the Neanderthal, since it's well known that human beings did interbreed with Neanderthals during that period of time. It's a reasonable assumption, except for one thing. We have had access to Neanderthal DNA for a while now, and there are actually quite a few samples of it that are well preserved. Specialists have been looking specifically for this gene and this allele, and the fact is, it doesn't seem to be there. And it's not for lack of them trying. They have been trying. I've read a number of the studies about this. So now maybe it is there. Maybe one day in 10 years or 20 years from now, maybe they'll find it. But there's a good chance they won't. There's been very thorough searching so far, and there's no luck. There actually was another human species around back then, a group known as the Denisovans. They were very closely related to Neanderthals. They looked a lot like them, very minor differences, but they're specifically separate genetically. And we have quite a lot less data on them. But similarly, there's no DNA connection to this gene or allele that's been found. And the studies linking that to Denisovans have been very, like the scientists basically said, it doesn't look like it's there. So now I'm mentioning all of this in a book on the alien agenda is why? Because the obvious possible conclusion is that if it wasn't the Neanderthals and it wasn't the Denisovans, then we've got this from some external source. And the question that I'm asking is, could that source be extraterrestrial?
Interesting. I was just looking for, I got the book Denisovan Origins. So he called them Denisovans or Denisovans. But basically, that is a hominid group from the Altai Mountains in Russia. And they were known to be able to withstand cold and hypoxia, low oxygen levels in the Altai Mountains. They were loners. They didn't travel in huge groups together. And interestingly enough, we only know about the Denisovans mainly because of a finger fragment, like a finger bone from a female Denisovan. I think, I could be wrong, but maybe 40,000 years ago was how long that was.
In that cave in Siberia or wherever.
In the cave in Siberia, in the Altai
Yeah.
Mountains.
Yeah.
And so Graham Hancock did the foreword for the book that Andrew Collins wrote called Denisovan Origins. Really good book. Gets a lot into Native American mythology as well, of the Cree and the Ojibwa that have Denisovan DNA. I don't want to go too off on it because he said this D allele gene was not in the Denisovan DNA. So that's pretty interesting. But the one thing about the Denisovan DNA that's found throughout South America more, and then only in the Cree and the Ojibwa up around the Great Lakes in North America, is that when, let's say, the Cree, who are also called the Nehuin, and Cree is almost like the Sioux. Sioux, the indigenous didn't call themselves that, the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, and it's almost derogatory. But anyway, the Cree or the Nehuin, they have this guy, Wilfred Buck, who talks about traveling between the stars with their star brothers and sisters from other star systems, and doing so with the power and the knowledge and the maps of wormholes. And I already got into this in a Waking Infinity show, but I find that really interesting that he mentions that, and this is roughly around the same time, but there's a gene outside of the Denisovans as well.
Right.
And so the last thing I want to end with is that the Cree and the Ojibwa, especially the Cree, they had it's called the Grand Medicine Society. It's their shamanic caste. So they were actually like, they had a caste made up of a shamanic society. They had their own tents, but then they stayed with the tribe. And then there was this other group that were far larger, and they were called the Jessikid. And they were a shamanic caste of much more sophisticated magicians, as they knew it. And they could perform far deeper healing. So when the Grand Medicine Society couldn't figure out how to heal somebody or something they needed that shamanic prowess for, they would go to the Jessikid, who are far bigger in stature and are believed to have the Denisovan DNA. So that's an interesting tie-in. I would have that clicked. It would have clicked a lot more had the Denisovan DNA had the D allele gene. But now this could be slightly different as well. So I'm just going to keep that in the back of my mind. You guys do the same. If anyone has any more information on that, let me know. But that was a good clip.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, that the allele is a really critical thing that he pointed out in this book that really stuck with me, and that's a pretty strong piece of evidence to use for the whole ancient astronaut theory, the ancient alien theory of have we been altered in some way genetically in the past. And I mean, that is, as he said, and as geneticists would say, only something that happens through interbreeding from an external source. So, and we'll get into present day, this whole idea of what they're doing on these craft, but a lot of it is still tied in with procreation of different ways and artificial insemination. And it seems to be a major through line that there's, there's a real reason to want to be mixing with humans, essentially. So, this next clip, let him keep diving deep into I think he starts now on to the first group.
Could it be that is an extraterrestrial solution to this? And I will have to say, absolutely, why not? Now, I don't know that, but I think it's a genuine possibility. To support this theory, I look at the spread of things like sky god myths in human history, and also brought forth some other connections that I believe strengthen this contention. One of them is the creative explosion that took place in our species around 40,000 years ago. I mean, certainly what we see at around that time is an exponential growth in human artistic genius, as well as in innovations in tool making and a lot more. So something clearly switched on with our species at around that time. Okay, so that's all I got to say on that whole thing. There's more in the book, but I'm just going to leave that here for now. Let's move on. The reason I brought this up is that if we are someone's project, like if there was some hypothetical extraterrestrial species that looked at us those thousands of years ago and said, close but not quite there, let's tweak them a little bit. Boom, here we go. Is that a possibility? If it is, then we might be somebody's project. in the line of what Charles Fort about 100 years ago wrote, he said, I think we're property. Maybe that's true. Or maybe we're someone's project. If that is so, right, someone who decided that we would benefit from a genetic tweak, then what do we have to say about all the beings that people have been interacting with over the years? So let's start looking at that. I began by looking at encounters that people have had with completely human-looking entities. Or I should say entities that look human or looked human, but somehow or another didn't seem entirely human. So anyone who has studied this area knows that there are many such accounts like this. And they go back for thousands of years. And as a matter of fact, we've got some very, very interesting written accounts that go back at least several centuries. I have included several of those accounts in my book. None of those beings, this is very interesting to say, come across as hostile. Those types of encounters, the beings really come across mostly as standoffish, but they do seem to have had an occasional interest in monitoring the activities of our ancestors and very occasionally interacting with them. So combined with enough of good quality observations of UFO activity in ancient times, my conclusion is that at least one significant group has been here for a very long time.
Okay, so that's the first main group he talks about in the book, that there is a very ancient group, at least one, could be multiple ones, but he definitely thinks there's one, and this idea of a human-looking group, which there's kind of many versions of human-looking groups, essentially, but a big popular one that's sort of big in the pop culture space of ufology is the Pleiadians. These very supermodel-like looking ETs, beautiful eyes, beautiful hair, that come apparently from the Pleiades star system. So that's one of the first main groups. And I believe later, and he discusses, but also in the meta-analysis, a lot of people have talked about experiences with this particular type of group. So next up, he's going to jump to, I believe, the next group.
Now, one question that I ask myself, and I'm sure you are asking at some point, is why would they look human?
No, he still does.
Why would any
into the human groups
aliens look human? This is something that's really bugged me for a long time, and I've thought about it. And I've developed some thoughts on this that I put into this book. Most of that I can leave to readers of the book. You can follow my argument there. But suffice to say that my best guess at this time is that some of our ancestors may very well have been taken, or let's say adopted, by some other advanced group, and essentially brought to that culture, to a completely different culture, a completely different society, and raised in that manner. That's one theory. And when I look over encounters that people have had in recent times with human-looking occupants of these craft, and there are quite a few of them, it becomes quite evident that those humans are very, very different from us. Even though they may look very much like us, there's a very different culture going on there. So I think that's one theory. Another theory, why would any aliens supposedly look human, is that whoever these beings were, they could make themselves look human, right? Through various illusions. You certainly hear stories of gray aliens, and I'm going to get to them in a minute, creating illusions in their appearance and visual illusions of different types. So maybe, and this is just a hypothesis, maybe that's what these other beings are doing. They're not actually human, but they made themselves look human. Okay. Or maybe that they actually are somehow human looking for reasons that are not clear to me, that I wouldn't understand why a species in another star system would have species that evolved to look that closely like us. Certainly the basic body plan, I think we can assume among successful technological organisms might actually look a lot like ours. It's totally possible. 2 arms, 2 legs, very handy. Eyes, 5-6 feet above the ground, very useful. Having them forward looking, all of that. It's very probable, in my opinion, that successful species elsewhere probably would develop a body plan, maybe not that different than what we have here. So it wouldn't shock me in the least to find that there are humanoid aliens throughout the universe. And maybe some of them look very close to us after all. I don't know. My best guess, if I were to take, would be the first of my theories, which is that probably some of us, our ancestors in the ancient past, were actually scooped up, taken, tweaked, and that's their world now. But that may be something we never know the answer to. It's just my best theory at this time. However that may be, the evidence, in my view, is that the presence of these beings over a long, long period of time took place, let's say, at a very low level. In other words, I don't want to say a fully hands-off monitoring, but I do not personally see any significant evidence at all that we've been interfered with in our history. This is my conclusion. Other people may feel differently. But I do think that we've been monitored at a low level for a long, long time, kind of like an observation monitoring sort of a thing. That is until something very important happened, until our civilization went through a major transformation. And this transformation, which we are going through right now, has gotten the attention, in my opinion, of other groups. I mean, after all, in the last century, human civilization has completely transformed itself. You know, we are now moving towards something that I've been calling the fourth stage of humanity.
All right. So
That's interesting. What, does he get into what he calls the fourth stage of humanity?
yeah, I think he's going to go into that next, and I have that queued up. But essentially, yeah, I'll let him get to it. But essentially, it's a combination of a lot of the industrial boom, AI boom, a lot of these various precipice points all kind of coming to a head, and really feels that evolution doesn't happen, linearly. It has moments of great exponential growth, and he feels we're at one of those moments of exponential growth.
Like what we say about evolution. Evolution doesn't happen slow and gradually and in one pace. It happens in spurts and fits and large events. And a lot of that kind of shows that our environment drives a lot of the way we evolve, the way we adapt. Our phenotype, is really a lot more having to do, a lot less from how we were programmed from our ancestry and more having to do with the environment.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. And, I've heard quite a few people, Michio Kaku also mentions where population density and scientific and technological advancement at some point will always arrive at this point. And it's interesting thinking that maybe humanoids came here long ago, and from where?
Yeah.
Right? And was it just because they had reached such a high peak in civilization that they were curious? Very, very possible. Is it also possible that they're doing exactly what Elon Musk is talking about today? Why don't we go colonize Mars? Why don't we start spreading our species out? And is that possible, and has that been done in the past? I surely believe it's possible. So
Well,
has it been done in the past?
And I mean, you look at how old the universe is, and you really crunch the numbers, and as we're seeing now, we're seeing more and
You
more.
mean like 7,000 years old, right?
Yeah, of course, bro.
Yeah.
But we're looking at how many habitable planets there are in the universe now, and how the likelihood is just going up and up that we're gonna probably find life, and so if it's just one species that's got a, say, even a 500-year start on us, but a similar planet, to a similar environment to our planet that creates some sort of similar carbon-based humanoid figure, being like to us, it's really not that crazy. It's not statistically that unlikely. It's probably leaning more towards more and more probable when we really more we see and look at and discover, looking, as we get telescopes that allow us to see farther and see more clearly. So if there's a species that's 10,000, 100,000, a million years ahead of us, that technology would look like magic. It would be indistinguishable. So I just think if that is the case, then these beings are not only advanced technologically, but also spiritually, culturally, on a lot of levels. They probably have developed a very robust and holistic, something that's works very well, that allows them to travel very far, and the home planet and everything is probably very peaceful and taken care of and prosperous, similar to the idea of the Star Trek Federation, right? You move past war, you move past poverty, you move past these primitive things based on scarcity mindset, and you become this very advanced type 3, type 2 type species. And I don't think it's a stretch either to say that you wouldn't also make alliances similar to how we do on this planet with other advanced benevolent type beings. You would want to team up with like-minded groups diplomatically and to share resources. And it's the whole idea of, why this planet has started to thrive more, because we're exchanging trade from all over the world and resources and services, and people can travel. So, yeah, I mean, and so he's just starting to get into this particular group, the humanoid group. And And he's going to dive deeper here now into what we were just discussing, though, this precipice point that we're at for humanity.
I want to talk a little bit about that because it's relevant for this topic here. What I mean by the fourth stage of humanity is that for all of our prior history, human beings have existed basically in three fundamental forms of society. Yes, there's been lots of variations, but the basic forms have been three types. First, there was hunting and gathering, which lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. And then, about 10 to 15,000 years ago, we began our first transformation to what I would call our second stage of existence, and that is the transformation to settled agriculture, sedentary agriculture, the agricultural revolution. This gave us our first cities, it gave us writing, it gave us the wheel, it gave us all the other inventions and developments of civilization. It gave us the Roman Empire, and it gave us all other human societies as well. It was quite a huge transformation, right? And that was our level for all the time since, until about roughly 300 years ago or so. And all of these don't happen overnight, obviously. They're a bit gradual. But that's when we went through our next transformation to what I call the third stage, and that is our world dominated by science and industry. So you're talking the scientific revolution and then followed not long after by the Industrial Revolution. And those changed our world just as radically as did the previous agricultural revolution. And this is when things really started picking up in speed, or our society really started transforming more rapidly. So by a little more than a century ago, let's say the turn of the 20th century, people were developing serious technology by this point. From railroads to telegraph to the car to the telephone to airplanes to electronics and powerful weapons like the atomic bomb and transistors and computers and space travel, the internet, smartphones. And now we are on the cusp of strong artificial intelligence and genetic engineering and really the digitization of our entire world and a lot more. And I'll just interject here. If some of you are wondering, like, well, why aren't you talking about this? I actually am talking about this all the time on my website. I haven't been as active here on YouTube, but I am very active on my site over at richardolanmembers.com, where I do weekly video podcasts and audio audio creations and articles. I do that all the time over there. So I'm talking a lot about the fourth stage of humanity and this transformation that we are going through. And it's an absolutely tremendous. Like, I think people are kind of getting it now, and you hear people talking about the Great Reset. And I think, yes, that is part of this, absolutely part of this. But this is even bigger than that, what I'm talking about. So now, because we are experiencing our next major transformation, the fourth stage of humanity. So what is that? It's a transformation unlike anything that we have ever been able to think about before. It includes not just strong artificial intelligence, not just genetic engineering, but it includes universal 5G technology and smart devices that are, unfortunately, from us, ending all traditional notions of privacy. This is something I've talked about here in the past. But also, it just includes much, much more. And while it threatens to take power away from individuals in all sorts of ways, it also is very likely going to give the human race as a whole tremendous power to do things it has never been able to do before. So I believe that this is why our development as a civilization has gotten the attention of anyone in our galactic neighborhood who has the ability to check us out. I think that is the main reason why the world during the 20th century experienced far, far greater numbers of UFO sightings and claims of alien encounters than ever before in our history. Yes, the advent of atomic weapons was clearly a signifier, but what I'm suggesting is these rapid developments in technology are like signposts towards something even bigger, and that is this transformation that I'm talking about.
The fourth stage of humanity. You know what that reminds me of?
No.
The fourth turning that we're in the middle of.
Right.
I went on the Tim Pool podcast. When was that, dude? That was March? Is that February?
A couple months ago.
Yeah, it was February or March. And I get there and Tim asked me, what do you want to talk about today? And I said, have you heard of the fourth turning? And he was like, is that Strauss-Howe generational theory? I was like, yeah. And for those of you who don't know, that's basically every 80 years or so, there seems to be a major crisis period, especially in Anglo-Saxon American history. So 80 years ago, World War II, 80 years before that, Civil War, 80 years before that, Revolutionary War, 80 years before that in England, there was even the Glorious Revolution. And it's this idea that every single time afterwards there is, it goes back, it goes to a high, and then it goes to an awakening, and then it goes to an unraveling, and then it goes back to a crisis period, and nobody is left alive. There are not many people are left alive that remember the last pattern. And every crisis period, as far back as we can go, ends in war with the most strongly sophisticated, basically weapons of mass destruction that are around. And so he's been talking about that a lot, and he was talking about that today with everything that's going on with Russia and China and stuff like that. So I kind of find it kind of interesting, even though there's not a direct correlation. But the 4 stages of humanity, does he talk about that in this book?
No, not specifically, but I mean, kind of tying that together is if he's saying this notion, and I do think we're at a precipice point for humanity in multiple ways. But I do think what's unique and different this time around, tying it into your idea of the fourth turning, is we've never had a massive extraterrestrial intervention happen on a planet-wide level, right? Maybe something small scale happened in the past that led to sort of cargo cults where they worship them as deities, and this idea of star people, Anunnaki, etc., in Sumerian, Mesopotamian, and earlier culture. But what we're, I think, getting prepped for is something similar to that, with so many indirect sightings occurring all over the world. And the real question is, are we going to be when are they going to intervene? Are they going to intervene, and are we going to be allowed to try to make it happen? If ride this ship, make things work out, essentially planet wide, with everything going on from war to X, Y, and Z. Or do they feel that they are needed to step in here, kind of like a father catching a child from falling, because they know this is that critical moment? And that's why they're going, all right, we're going to let them try to make it, but if they're about to fall, will they intervene or not? And and I think maybe part of helping us get through this point could be us acknowledging them. And look, like for me, I couldn't think of anything really better than to unify our entire planet than a benevolent advanced species interacting with us and saying, hey, we'd love to help, but out of love, here's a few things we would recommend you do a little bit better, and we can provide some tools and feedback and stuff. But we know what, I really try to just look at what we know, and then you can extrapolate from there. But what we know is we're seeing all these indirect sightings. It seems like it's ramping up, and so I think what they're doing is they're letting us they're giving, I think, in my opinion here, I think they're allowing the government an opportunity to try to be transparent, to try to come forward. But I don't know if they're going to wait forever. It seems like things are speeding up. So maybe they're feeling pressure behind the scenes to do something. It's like, look, you either tell the people what's going on and be more open with them, because you are the ones who technically are in power positions, et cetera, and we respect how you do things, even though we don't like the design. It is you are a sovereign species entitled to decide how you want to govern your people. But we're at a point where they're, whether they like it or not, kind of being forced to kind of tell us a little bit more. And I don't know how high up that goes, literally. But the ball is moving. People are more aware of it now more than ever. They're going to obviously try to control the narrative, but this is a chess game in a lot of ways. There's probably good and bad elements, white hats and black hats, within the military-industrial complex, deep state, whatever you want to refer to it as. And the people themselves have an ability to affect these things and how they play out. By the more educated they become independently, listening to podcasts like this, doing their own research. But this feels like it definitely is a precipice point, and I think they have to be aware of that. I mean, if they're that advanced, it's just like they're checking the pulse of a patient. Like, our heartbeat is getting really fast right now. It seems like we're at a kind of a serious moment when you look at just what's happening.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I wanted to mention. There's actually, rather than weapons of mass destruction, at some point we started hearing the phrase weapons of mass deception. And what Richard Dolan said, like in the 4 stages of humanity, there's going to be a lot of things like strong AI. And when he's talking about strong AI, I assume he's talking about artificial general intelligence, which can learn how to learn. So there is narrow AI, which you can teach it to learn how to play chess. But if you try to get it to tell you the best option of another purchase or something like that, it wouldn't be able to help you at all.
Right.
So it's very narrow.
Yeah.
So strong AI, 5G, he said, and I think 6G is literally only a year or two around the corner. And then eventually we might stop seeing such clear 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. And because 5G isn't the replacement of 4G, it's adding on top of it. 6G isn't going to be the replacement of 5G, it's adding on top of it. It's adding complexity to the communication. And then genetic engineering. And so the interesting thing I see about that is we don't need to be, we already saw what could be seen as the ultimate weapon, with atomic and nuclear weaponry. Beyond that, it's just how many more nukes can you have, and that's how we can destroy the world hundreds of times over by now. And so strong AI, 5G, smart cities, genetic engineering, things along those lines, that is what is being used right now. Because really the only thing that's going on, other than some upsets, not even huge inflation, we're not seeing other than the past 2 years have been weird for very specific reasons. But other than that, it's not like, other than protests and things like that, that there's huge skirmishes between countries. So there's not World War III like we would have imagined it. And so you say, could they be stepping in? Whatever this is, could there be some kind of other higher intelligent force stepping in at a point so where we don't just destroy ourselves? And I'm curious about that for sure. And I'm also very the one thing I want to say that I feel a connection between what I was saying with the DMT, pan-dimensional, interdimensional beings, and ET, alien connections, because all the way back to Terrence McKenna, he was talking about that connection. Graham Hancock is also talking about a lot of the abduction stories. He and this other author that he was researching was drawing one-to-one correlations between abduction stories and endogenous DMT dumps. And this is not to discount one for the other, because you'll hear things as long as, as far as people saying you and me, Gorda, we've met in the flesh, but right now we're only meeting in a digital forum. And then later, if you and I were really, really, in tune with one another, we could meditate and potentially meet each other in another form, less restricted by 3D reality
body
here.
Kind of idea.
Right. So there's at least enough anecdotal evidence to take a look at the beings that we're seeing on DMT and what tribes were seeing through ayahuasca and various other sacraments, that these are beings that could also have a physical body elsewhere. Right. And the fact that DMT brings them about doesn't mean that's the only explanation for it. Right. So I want to throw that out there. And I guess after this next clip, I want to talk about Charles Eisenstein and his ideas about that. But I wanted to let you chime in.
And to back up that kind of, and what witnesses say who have been on board, if these beings do have the ability to use craft that can basically blink in and out of space-time, meaning they most likely have some strong understanding of dimensions and dimensionality to where their craft can go into a different dimension. A lot of people talk about ships phasing in and out or just blinking out of, right away, just seems like they just blink out of existence, literally. If these beings and their technology is integrated with consciousness itself, which a lot of people talk about, that the craft is actually synced with the pilot's consciousness and moves based on the thought of the pilot, these beings also being able to blink in and out of space-time, then they could go to a certain dimension. Maybe they know how to get to the dimension that's the same dimension that you're experiencing under dimethyltryptamine, right? So their understanding of dimensions and these kind of things probably would be so much more advanced to us, but to them it's probably like, oh, this is basic algebra, right? Like we don't know how normalized it is to them already. But once again, if we're looking at the scale of things, and if you extrapolate out, like if these beings have learned already how to create extremely organic consciousness integrated technology with their ships blinking out, I mean, a lot of these things, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, as you're saying. It could be both, that they have their ability to drop into third dimension, vibrate at that frequency, energy, and vibration, similar along how Tesla described understanding the universe, and then turn up the dial essentially like on a radio and blink into a different frequency or vibration in a different dimension. I mean, all the scientists are saying now it's like 12 dimensions, and it could be dimensions layered on top of each other, right? So they could just be one little dimension above, and DMT might be 4 or 5 up, but the concept behind this, if you understand the mechanics and the mathematics or the physics or whatever exactly it is when you're dealing with that stuff, then you know how to manipulate it. I mean, just like once we learned how to manipulate Einstein's equations and understand GPS and all these things that now would be considered magic 200 years ago to people. You know, the fact we're doing this right now would seem crazy 150 years ago, maybe a lot less.
Exactly. And, you know, when we come back, I want to talk about 2 different things. For one, you're mentioning the 12 different dimensions of reality, and the idea that some people say, like, I don't think we're living inside of a simulation. I think we're building one, and we're preparing people with this idea that, oh, we're already inside a simulation. Why not 6G sentient world simulation? And there are, you know, 7, you know, so there's, you know, as far as like the internet, there's the physical layer, the data link layer, the network layer, transport layer, session layer, presentation layer, application layer. And so like these are different layers of the internet as well, could almost be looked at as dimensions of the reality of the simulation that is being built. It really is. And the other thing you said is like, how could these intelligent beings potentially control craft that move in ways that would rip a human apart so fast it would rip a human apart? I asked Charles Eisenstein about that. I'm just going to say it now, and I'll make it brief. But he was basically, you know, saying, he was like, you know, well, there's an explanation that I don't hear enough people talking about. And I was like, they're unmanned, controlled by consciousness. And he said, they don't have to be. Electron tunneling and really teleportation in the quantum field is well understood. We don't understand its practical application, but we know that there's an electron, and this is something I even told him. I was like, wow, mentioning that, like, yeah, NASA even put something out, I think it was 2012 or 2014, where they said there's an electron diffusion region where the Earth's electromagnetic field meets, it starts like clashing with the sun's electromagnetic field, and it creates this electron diffusion region. So that's an EDF, EDR, and you can look that up. And apparently small, but not even ridiculously small particles have been found by NASA to, at that point, go through wormholes and appear instantaneously at or around the surface of the sun. How that's detected, I really don't know, but I read the NASA article. I'll see if I can dig that up while we're on here. But basically, Charles's idea was that when you see this craft doing something that challenges what modern scientists understand, it could also be because modern science is looking at ways of framing the explanation as being something that is similar to the way planes fly. Right. And similar to the way, you know, like it could be a completely different ball field where there is something about the shape which doesn't look like a flying object to us, right? These shapes don't look like something that we would say, oh, that's super aerodynamic, ready for flight. Could it be that these are operating, what Charles Eisenstein said was, in different timelines, different people's realities. So the people who do see these types of things, they're seeing it because it's in a timeline that they're willing to open up their spectrum of consciousness to receive. Others, they will be looking, and I have an anecdote. I won't share it now, but I have an anecdote of exactly this, where other people, super credible people that I know, one being Pete Evans and my camera guy, when we were filming a film on cannabis, saw something in the sky. I saw one thing. The other people around me saw the same thing. They didn't see it that same way. And I was super confused by that. And Charles's explanation is that we see what we are ready to see. We fill in the blanks of what we're seeing through conscious processes as much as actually just seeing raw reality, if there is such a thing. Mm-hmm. And he's basically saying that a lot of the maneuvers that these crafts are performing have more to do with something akin to electron tunneling or teleportation. And when you're seeing them moving, almost like frame by frame in a movie, like that, it's teleportation in that direction. And to me, I asked, well, why would it move at all? Why wouldn't it just teleport from place to place instead of going glitchy. Frame by frame?
Yeah.
And he said, well, the frame by frame wouldn't be like the types of frames that we're talking about. It would be something that would appear seamless in the same way that human movement looks seamless, even though the mind seems to break things down into frames too. But his explanation for that was their signaling. As far as I remember, he was saying it's a signal. It's there to be seen.
Yeah.
Like they're not there to be missed. They're there to be seen. And one more thing, and I want you to comment on that, but there was Marlon Turdu said, she's in the chat. She said, I'm an airline pilot, and if you knew how many times air traffic control radar asks around if aircrafts in their sector are able to see something that suddenly pops up on their radar screen. And she basically just says, beneath that, she was like, I'll try to focus from now on the reports from civilian aviation, because it's kind of interesting that the military has only focused on stories that have come out of military aviation, even though there are far more civilian aircraft in the sky.
Right. Well, and what I know, Lazar and a few other people, I think Lou Elizondo might have talked about this, but a few other people also talked about, look, I think what we're seeing is multiple different versions of multiple different technologies, right? Some very, very, very advanced. What you're talking about seems very advanced, and some a little bit more primitive, right? But ultimately, they all have the ability to be interstellar. And the more advanced one also have the ability to go under the ocean. And the more advanced ones also have the ability to blink in and out of space-time, essentially, versus the other ones that have to use some sort of propulsion to just fly away very, very fast. So one of the other big propulsion engines or systems talked about is the idea of some sort of anti-gravitic type engine that's creating a basically sort of like a warp drive. It's creating a bubble around the craft that's literally pushing like a bowling ball on a piece of very flexible fiber. It's pushing in front of the craft, and the craft is literally moving by the bowling ball moving along. And so there's I'm sure there's a bunch of different tech when we really start diving into this and actually start diplomatic relations with more advanced civilizations than us. They're going to show us all kinds of different technologies. But the bottom line is that we have to, start taking these things more seriously, which is happening. And we have to not also be afraid to start discussing theoretically what experiencers and people who have more direct knowledge with seeing these beings and being aboard these craft when they're, hypnotically regressed or various ways that, if they still remember it, that they are bringing forth their story. And a lot of times the benevolent beings that talk to these experiencers on the craft say, hey, we love you. We're here to help, but, you've got to really get your shit together, essentially. You've really got to take care of your act and clean up your planet. There's a lot of pollution. You guys got to stop the war. These nukes are not a good idea. And it's really just like, we're here to help, but you've really got to also step up too. It's the idea of you can teach a man to fish or you can give the man a fish, right? Teach us to be a better version of ourselves is a big part of this. And they don't want to hinder, in my opinion, they don't want to hinder our growth evolutionarily from making us worship them also. This idea of them putting them on a pedestal as gods. In Star Trek, there's an amazing episode in the J.J. Abrams, I think it's Into Darkness, or one of his recent big blockbuster ones, where Captain Kirk's running from the volcano exploding on this red planet, and the indigenous people are chasing him. And Spock's really upset because he's breaking the Prime Directive. And as soon as the Enterprise takes him away and they fly off, all the beings that barely have just not even discovered the wheel yet immediately draw the picture of the Enterprise in the dirt, and they start worshiping it. Right, so logically, it would make a lot of sense if you are a very advanced species and you come across a very indigenous primitive species and you just jump in and start messing with their evolution, you could really mess up their evolution in a lot of ways. I mean, we already see this in what happens like we did in World War II with the cargo cults and the various island nations that saw planes and soldiers, then created straw huts and versions of these things and worshipped it. So.
Think about children. You can't push children to grow up immediately. There's a correct sequence. I want to say real quick, Marlin. I was saying it was a she. Marlin is a he. The pilot, the civilian pilot, and also a Robert Bridge in UK says satellites could also broadcast all sorts of projections. I just want to bring our attention back to. If you haven't Googled or even looked on YouTube, the Needle in the Sky New Year's Eve event in Seattle, where there was a projective holographic thing that even I wanted to mention this earlier because first it's like, how do they project it precisely to make it look like something's flying around the Space Needle in Washington?
And shows up on radar for pilots and all these other things, right?
Right. And it's showing up. It's showing up like that. And you also mentioned, so anyone who wants to watch that, look at the motifs that they're placing in that video, because there's mitosis, there's a chrysalis, and then a butterfly coming out. There's all this, there's a genetic swirl going on in it. And the whole thing, to me, reminds me of some kind of show of like, there is something evolving, something transforming, something turning into a different version of itself. And this was brand new for most people. Like, I hadn't seen anything like it. It took a couple weeks for somebody to put it across my radar to where I was like, oh, wow, projections are there. Because I knew I used to be in the concert business. I used to wonder, do you have to have like, what do you call that, dry ice and all the artificial fog in the air and then shoot lasers into it to create a 3-dimensional image above the audience's head? So they're listening to Pink Floyd and tripping out, whatever, and then they look above them and there's a flying saucer above them. Does there need to be that fog up there? And no, there doesn't. If you watch this Needle in the Sky New Year's Eve event 2020,
well, we've definitely got super advanced holographic software now. I mean, look at Tupac performing at the famous big one, and I definitely think that exists. But Catherine Austin Fitch and Dolan really go through all this with a fine comb and any debunk or counter theories, and the scale and just the cost of how much this is happening on a worldwide level would probably just bankrupt us. That alone, just the sheer amount. But
well, I have to call attention to, the 21 trillion that we were talking about before.
All projectors.
It wouldn't be impossible, and I wouldn't. Here's the thing: like, you bring up a very good point. Is it worth putting projections out in the middle of the ocean so a Navy pilot will go on 60 Minutes and say, yeah, I saw something, and they're speaking their own truth because in truth they really did see something like that? Is it all just a holographic projection to take over the world, like Project Bluebeam, like Serge Monast said? There's going to be a fake alien invasion.
That's the psyop theory. Yeah,
that's a psyop theory, and I have to bring attention to it. But again, I'm not even fully standing on that, because I have to have an open mind towards the fact that we're all biased. We're all coming from a very little bit of context, a very little bit of information plugged into a little bit of context in a world of stuff we don't know, talking about, do I believe it or do I not believe it? I think it's best that we just, like you said, stay really just kind of neutral to the information, take a look at it, but not deny that we also have holographic technology.
That's important for other angles. I just really try to approach it, like we said from the get with this whole podcast, as an investigative journalist or a lawyer arguing a case. Like, where does the most evidence support what conclusion, essentially, And with what they're doing with jamming radars, with what we know about physical material and metamaterial supposedly in possession by the government, there's so many other angles where it just makes like that theory not really stand ground enough for that to be alone. Now, I'm not negating that there might be certain instances where they try to use that, but
Right.
with these certain really, really credible cases like Dr. Commander Fravor and the Tic Tac and the gimbal videos, there's really something clearly going on here. And in a real, very physical way that the pilots can't explain, and they're seeing and they're tracking and all these things. And so, jumping back though to Dolan, essentially though, all of this being based on meta-analysis, once again, of people who are actually experiencing these beings on a craft and experiencing these beings interacting with them. So now he's, I think, finishing discussing the fourth phase, and then he's going to touch on the next group.
Now, even though throughout our long history, people saw what we would call UFOs, and they also encountered beings, or I guess I should say claimed that they encountered beings that were not from here. It was really only during the 20th century that this really happened in the sense of non-human looking beings, that is aliens. It's true, like there were sightings of so-called fairies and little people and things like that. So I shouldn't make it a full blanket statement like that, but I'm talking about the types of aliens that people report nowadays. That includes beings we call the Greys, right? And it also includes other types of beings that are sometimes overlooked that people have described. Other humanoid beings that are short, but not the Greys, sometimes described in various crash retrieval accounts. I discuss this in the book as well. It also includes taller entities, and it includes beings that look like other species on Earth, like insect-like beings or reptilian type beings, and others still that look sort of human, but not quite human. So when you go through these reports, as I have gone through them in preparing this book, you have to allow for a substantial amount of error on the part of witnesses. I think that's just inevitable. But the thing is, there's been a tremendous amount of consistency with the basics. In my view, something definitely is going on regarding other types of beings that are here. Now, these other types of beings do not all act the same. One group has consistently been linked to the phenomenon of abductions, and that is the Greys, of course. I spent a fair amount of space in the book analyzing the Greys and what they appear to be up to. There is clearly a covert operation going on. And in the book, I make the case that this operation is known to at least some of the human elite that has power today. And also, I make the case that this elite is powerless over what is going on, or at least they feel that they are powerless to do anything about it. And that is one big reason for secrecy on their part. It's not the only reason, but it is a big reason. I don't think that they are able to stop this. And if they were to out the whole thing to the rest of the world, I don't think that they are confident that they could deal with it effectively, even under those conditions. And I think that's why they're not. That is one reason why they're not saying anything. I also think, and I wrote in this book, that the abduction program, I think, is going on for multiple reasons. It's not just.
One second here. Oh, back to back. All right, we're back.
I mean, the main reason everyone talks about is the creation of a genetic hybrid species, one that looks human while still possessing critical qualities that the Greys have, and also their allies. If you believe that the insectolin type beings are their allies, which I think David Jacobs is probably right on this, and that the insectolin type beings are really running the show in the background. I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. But anyway, the point of these hybrids is that they look human, but they have certain qualities that these other beings also have. One of those qualities is some form of telepathy, or if you don't want to use the word telepathy, maybe some level of mental influence that they are able to exert. So yes, you can see this element of it as a form of infiltration, and I do think that is a genuine possibility. I also think that there are other motivations for abductions that are separate from hybridization. And I go into these in the book. One of them I would just simply characterize as a highly sophisticated monitoring operation via implants. I definitely think that is going on. And not just by the Greys.
So once again, this is him really diving into the meta-analysis of many, many thousands of experiencers. And the key things we're focusing on here is not all the really like minute speculative stuff, but what are the core things that a lot of people are saying that is correlating a lot. There's, a lot of people are saying this specific group, like the Greys, this specific group, like the Mantids, and seeing a lot of times when they're under regression and recalling back what they experienced, that the Mantis were essentially directing, and they felt like through multiple variables in their mind, like, their body language, the way they acted, what they heard or experienced. They felt like the mantids were more in charge for the Greys, essentially. And so what you're starting to realize, and this is what Dolan says also, that's important, I think, here, is that you have multiple people in this whole field of ufology that, I'll just be very blunt here. There's two leading figures that I respect both of their work, but I'm slightly critical of their work to one degree, where I think they're being a little bit narrow-minded. And the two main figures are Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Greer. Dr. Greer, a lot of people give him pushback because he thinks all ETs are benevolent and good. Dr. Jacobs, people give him pushback because he thinks all ETs are negative and malevolent. I think it's a mixture. I think we live in a very large universe, similar to, as Dolan says, and that basically we have some benevolent beings, we have malevolent beings, and I think we just have neutral beings that are just here to just kind of watch the show and are very hands-off. So I don't think it's absolute one way or the other, and I think it's an important nuance that needs to be kind of put out in the open when we start talking about these different groups, and people start to get kind of anxiety and fear as these possibilities of these kind of crazy conspiracy theories might actually start to be a little bit more true, that these types of beings do exist. And ultimately, I'm very optimistic, though, that we can get our act together, we can make smart diplomatic relations with the benevolent good groups, and we can insulate ourselves from any malevolent bad guys by being in a strong alliance with the benevolent good guys. And I think part of that alliance would be, hey, just stop killing each other and maybe put away these really dirty and nasty weapons, and we'll give you great weapons to help with self-defense, but aren't gonna ruin your atmosphere, and maybe have some fail-safes where you don't kill each other with it, but it'll protect you against any type of threat they might have, right? We don't know that level of tech and all that, but I am very hopeful that we can be smart about this. And this was sort of when we first started this whole series, was sort of the tough, this is apparently what happens by what lawyer Eisenhower and others have said, and other corroborating evidence of people at the airfields. The word on the street goes that apparently Eisenhower, and there's a lot of evidence of people seeing him land at that airport that day, and we went over that he did meet with at least one group that day, and the word is from his granddaughter, Laura, that he met with multiple groups, and that the Greys were not asking him to give up our nuclear weapons, and the benevolent sort of humanoid group were asking us to give them up, but we're also saying we'll give you amazing tech to help rejuvenate and make your planet thrive and your people prosper. And the word is he succumbed to his sort of military paranoia coming out of World War II, that they needed to still have these nukes to protect ourselves. And the idea is that we have basically created some sort of exchange program with the Greys to allow them to abduct people on this planet in exchange for certain tech they might have to reverse engineer. And this is why certain abductees and experiencers also say they do see sometimes military officials on the craft with the Greys, that we know and are willingly just kind of monitoring their program of us.
I'd never heard of that.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's a big red
plot
hill.
thickens.
And take it as you want, but that is sort of the main sort of theory leading up to post-World War II up to now, kind of.
Yeah. I definitely feel like I definitely like that Richard Dolan said before that in the fourth stage of humanity, he mentioned genetic engineering on top of AI and on top of all those things. And, when there are people like the David Icks and really the ones whose ideas are the most uncomfortable to look at as far as the transhuman agenda.
Well, the reptilians, that's his big thing, is exposing this bizarre or crazy outwardly notion that actually humanoid reptilian beings actually exist. And I remember when I first saw that, and when anyone would hear that just sounds so bananas.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, this is not about really just what's uncomfortable for us. If you hear, part of it is, we're looking to the abyss, but I'm a firm believer in the more we know, the less we'll be afraid, right? Ignorance leads to fear. And so a lot of the part of this meta-analysis, a large group that a lot of people say they've experienced is that group, and we have to just own that.
For sure. I think we also need to be super honest with ourselves. Like, I get skepticism. I get where skepticism comes from, and I have it, but I think it's used in an imbalanced way with a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are skeptical and they're not open-minded.
They're
But if
cynical.
you can hold, well, and that's what that is. The
Yeah.
absence of open-mindedness with
Yeah.
skepticism turns to cynicism.
Yeah.
The absence of skepticism with open-mindedness turns to gullibility.
Right.
So, the interesting thing about that is, when you look back through history, you see a lot of reptilian iconography that doesn't prove anything. But what it does say is that we come from thousands of years, let's just say a couple thousand years of cutting the tallest poppy, if you know what that phrase means. The tallest poppy is like if anyone stands out from the herd,
Right.
if you're special in a way that most people can't conceive of, cut it down. It looks odd. You want a field of poppies that's all the same size, all the same height. And so the idea of cutting the tallest poppy, we've been doing that with everything, with our ideology. We've been doing it with potentially the way, definitely the way we feed ourselves, our morphology, our civilization, a lot of these things. We are conforming, we're homogenizing in big ways. If we do that, if we go on this several thousand year long normalization campaign, then anything that our ancestors used to possibly be like, yeah, there's totally beings, they visit from the stars. Then we'll look at people like Wilfred Buck today and, from the Cree saying that, our ancestors say that we have constantly been communicating with star people and traveling the cosmos using stargates, and using wormhole technology, and not technology that's outside of us, but actually inherent within us. That would seem crazy to us, even though First Nations people are talking about that. You mentioned mantid. Is that like praying mantis?
Yeah, like basically they look like very large 7 to 9 foot tall praying mantis beings. And
You know
sometimes,
where
a lot
else?
of times wearing robes. So these praying mantis are wearing clothes. Like
Interesting.
It's just like,
That's
this
very
is-
Star
all right.
Wars.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah.
You know what that reminds me of? All those DMT trip reports.
Oh yeah. People
Huge
talk about
praying
that.
mantis,
Yeah.
insectoid-like beings that were
Yeah.
extremely intelligent.
Yeah.
And maybe they were like 5 million times the size of them, but that could be the difference of the DMT state.
Mhm.
The only way that your symbolic mind can conceptualize something so much more intelligent is to just make it far bigger, right? So these are just concepts, but we used to work at Gaia. Just south of where we were working is the largest alpine basin in the world. So you look where Crestone, Colorado is, and you see that there's all this UFO activity and sightings and, paranormal phenomenon that happen around there. The indigenous, the First Nations people, no one lived there in that basin. They would hunt there during the good season and they'd get the hell out of there during the winter seasons. And even warring tribes would call truce to go in there. But several of those tribes mention that there are ant-like people under the ground that come out every now and then. Several of the tribes, different tribes, have these motifs of insectoid ant-like people, their height, their size, coming out of the ground, and they live in subterranean habitats. So there may also be a lot going on right beneath our feet that we just have very, very little clue of.
Right. Well,
So-
we know we don't live in a hollow. I mean, in my strong opinion, a lot of science I think backs up. We don't live in a hollow Earth, but we know there are large cavernous subterranean bubbles essentially that can appear in subterranean areas. And I've been watching the show, The Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of this people who probably watch this right now are watching it. But I recommend it. It's on History Channel. It's season 2 now. But a lot of Travis Harris, he's an astrophysicist. They have a lot of top-notch scientists at the ranch, and they're doing all these massive tests with thermo, nuclear, magnetic, all these different tests on these certain areas. And a big thing that pops up is this idea of these skinwalkers that have been there for hundreds of years. All the native people nearby have talked about similar to what you're saying. And a lot of the owners and original people who've lived on this ranch talk about this idea of portals. And they have some weird things happen on the show that kind of correlate to that. But it's this idea of portals and things coming out and popping through, and this, and it starts to kind of line up with what the native indigenous people said all over the world. ancient archaeology, what we're knowing now and more with covert space program things, and all of these concepts, portals, faster than light speed travels, interdimensionality, all these things, like I said, I think these are all just different forms of some type of new, more advanced technology or way to manipulate reality very directly. And that's just like that's the level of how primitive we are when you start really saying, if these things are real and they exist and these beings already know how to manipulate them to this degree where they can just use it like taking an elevator up and down, then yeah, we're so primitive. I mean, and I think our arrogance, we should already be that way. We're a very young species, really, cosmically speaking. And we are really the new kid on the block, but we have a big ego, I'm sure, when they look at us. We are very full of ourselves with the way we treat our environment and the things around us. Like, we don't even think we're part of the animal kingdom anymore, essentially. We're like, we've got off that because we've got iPhones and, it's like, so we are very disconnected in that way. But the bottom line is, whether you like us or not, what we're already starting to do with technology and all these major precipice points, I think is going to affect more than just our planet. It's having a ripple effect. It's bigger than us on the cosmic level. And that's kind of what Dolan was talking about with this whole fourth phase, is that they're seeing and monitoring and going, okay, now they're getting to a point similar to when we started using nukes. There's a lot more activity. All these other things, hard AI, geoengineering, all these things, if we're already some strange, slightly genetic experiment, and then we start messing with our CRISPR and our own DNA, maybe they're like, hey, no, like that's our thing, or you're not able to start doing that. Like, we don't know the level of what their interest is and why they're appearing more. What we do definitely know, though, is that there is a lot more activity, clearly. And we do know that we are exponentially growing very fast, and we're hitting some major time markers for our evolution on a lot of different fronts. So it makes sense. Right now would be a key time for them to get more involved, but there's no guarantees. I'm not sitting here saying like they're definitely going to happen after this June hearing or this or this. I've said from the get, the more we can do to, I think, get honest and real about this as a collective, and the more we can take steps to push that transparency on our elected government officials and people who work for us. Let's all remember this. They are servants to the people. The things they're doing are a lot of times unconstitutional. We can demand more transparency. We can handle this. We're big boys and girls, so
I would love to get Richard Dolan on, and we'll hop into trying to get some, like, Catherine Austin Fitz and Richard Dolan on, because I like that Richard Dolan mentioned how many people are talking about the Great Reset right now. And he said, this is way bigger than that. I would love to hear his take on that, because the Great Reset, okay, Klaus Schwab, he wrote this book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. It was almost like it was written before COVID-19, but that's just my hunch. But it was basically saying how we use this opportunity of COVID-19 to be like, oh, well, we've wanted a big change, a big green push, something better for the planet, something better for the economic system. Let's just do it all now while everyone's already up in arms anyway. Let's push it in there. The Great Reset. Yeah. To me, I feel like there's also a hijacking of a narrative there, and I find it kind of curious that all this is happening at the same time. I find myself wondering how much of it is connected and how much of it is responsive or reactive to other news that's really big. Right. How do we use this UAP phenomena to get our economic thing? Because there's legislators out there that, like, they don't know what they believe, or they believe in God and they probably think this is all a trick of the devil, and they want to get their legislation through for the new economic, the Great Reset coming. I'm speaking very loosely and symbolically here, but like basically the reactionary tale is another thing. I know a lot of people within the conspiracy movement, it's easy to feel like at the top it all must be singular. They must be so intelligent that all super wealthy and super intelligent beings, whatever, they know one another and they must be on good terms. But I also wonder if that's the case as well with stuff this.
I definitely think, going back to C. Wright Mills, I do think definitely this power elite exists, right? That there are there is a great benefit to collude with other powerful people in other industries. If you scratch my back, I scratch your back. I mean, this is how generational wealth is created, is that there are interests of power elites that synergize well together, and they form a type of powerful cartel. I mean, before we had antitrust and business practices, this was just, it was very obvious. You had, these titans of industry, the Rockefellers, the robber barons, they were called, until we started breaking them up. And you could argue that it didn't really, it made them even stronger. But the bottom line is that when you are incentivized in a system that incentivizes power and money to be, to get massive market consolidation, then you will do that. And so I do think we have, when you just look at the numbers, there's massive money missing, there's massive market consolidation that's occurred, and that we do know that these groups do exist, like the Bilderberg, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, where there is clearly the most powerful and wealthy in industry icons meeting to discuss things, a lot of times in a very secretive, covert way. And secrecy is never really a good sign. Whether you're neutral on this or skeptical, why do you have to be so secretive? So you don't have to necessarily say that every single person knows about it, but I do think, what we do know from Catherine and Dolan's work is that, and other people's work, that there are people who have higher levels of security clearance in the DOE, in the DOD, in these various governmental bodies, higher than presidents, and are able to say to a sitting president, sorry, sir, you're on a need-to-know basis, and you don't have clearance for that. Go get approval from the Library of Congress, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that exists, and we know that there are lifetime members in these various bodies who would have a vested interest to keep this secret, even if it's for the most benevolent good reason that my job is to protect the people, and if they knew about this without me giving them a good solution to it, then I would be in hot water. Then I would be seen as obsolete. Then I would be seen as useless at my job, essentially. And I think there's a mixed bag there, probably occurring behind the scenes. But everyone, ultimately, both groups, whatever side they're on behind the scenes, feel that we're not ready to handle the truth, or at least to this point. That has been the directive. That is what has been said. That's what all these the Condon Committee, all these BS hearings they had through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, saying, oh, it's just weather balloons or swamp gas and all this. The whole premise behind saying why they could justify that to the American people was that they can't handle the truth. They can't handle the truth. They will freak out. Things will get too bad. So we need to keep this closed off until we know more. And now that's changing. Whether they like it or not, we don't know exactly why and all these things, and you can point to various figures, but it is changing. And so what that means now with the ETs and how they are, this whole, said reaction given response, that it's getting really exciting and really interesting. But I feel the more we change, the more they're allowed to be like, all right, you're ready to hear the truth.
Yeah.
Sorry,
is that on your side? Blame. Yeah. So, so the one thing I wanted to say or ask first is, like, we got another clip coming up, right?
Yeah, we have two more left.
Okay, cool. So I want to hop into that, but you said something about secrecy, and it's interesting because I've been studying magic and alchemy for well over, going on 3 decades now, and with that, secrecy is actually built into magic. And it's built into magic, which is an interesting thing to talk about when you're talking about, like, what could a lot of government be, and not government in general, like what we see, but governance in general, whether it be from the corporate sector through the economic system, top down, is secrecy is one of the cornerstones of magic. This is why you see it in Freemasonry. You see it in many different kinds of, hermeticism and things along those lines. There is something about the illusion, of magic. And magic, as much as it does arrive at real outcomes, a lot of it is about illusion, and a lot of it is about belief and fostering and cultivating belief in others. And secrecy has a core role to that. So it's interesting that you say that, because really one thing that is slightly being threatened with 5G technology and a lot of what Richard Dolan was saying was privacy being a thing of the past, but not everyone's privacy. 99% of people's privacy, yes, but not everyone's privacy. And we know this for certain, that there are a lot of super wealthy people that you cannot find traces of online. And as easily, I mean, at all, or as easily as you could find just average people, scrubbed from the data aggregation centers. So there's something interesting about that, the secrecy element, why we only get spoon-fed these, like drip feeding of information here and there.
Well,
there's probably a lot more
you,
that could be disclosed.
I can tell you, and I'll be very careful here. I don't even want to give the location, but I know somebody who I spoke with recently, a couple months ago, who works in what's called JSOC, Joint Security Special Chiefs. Oh my gosh, I'm butchering it. Special Operations Command, JSOC. So like very creme de la creme type, and he's an analyst. And I was helping him do a task, and we were just talking about, we got on the topic of just human beings and the masses essentially. And it was very normalized, and he felt very justified in basically saying essentially though that the masses are the masses are stupid essentially. The masses are stupid, and that we need people to basically, this is why elites exist, and this is why, we need people in charge, because, if you give the masses too much of a voice and opinion, the masses are stupid. And it's very much, I could realize, and I think this trickles into a lot of these same power circles, is that they truly feel that the masses are stupid and obsolete. And they truly feel that it's their duty to protect us from ourselves, essentially. And that ethos pervades a lot of these systems, from politics to defense contracting to a lot of it. And that type of ethos is exactly behind this same type of thing with, well, of course, then we're not going to tell the masses about probably one of the most sensitive, important breakthroughs technologically, probably in our lifetime, right? There's no way they could handle that, let alone way less stuff. And I think that is a core philosophy that okay, fine, maybe that's the case, but we have to just really take back our power peacefully and through various, there's various ways. We've got solutions of disclosure and pushing, but essentially, I don't believe that. I believe the masses aren't. Yeah, okay, you'll have various people who you wouldn't call the sharpest tool in the box, but the bottom line is I'm very much a pro-humanist. I believe in telling the masses things, giving the masses more power and direct voice, and I believe that was very much the ideals of the founding fathers. And I believe that this is just their most prized secret, and one that I think will have the biggest impact on the masses at the same time. So,
I dig it. Yeah.
I just think that's an important component that I just want to point out of understanding these people. And when we say, why do they do this or this, that's a core part of the philosophy behind a lot of this. And this idea of in general, I think of anti-elitism right now. Anti-elitism sentiment right now is people feel very condescended to on the left and the right, and they feel very patronized, and it's in all ways of life. And I think the people are tired of it, but I think, like I said, we there's ways of doing this effectively, non-violently, and there's a lot of solutions, and we can have a whole other series getting into that. We've talked about it before, but to me, this is the creme de la creme of what they're suppressing, because of the technological innovations, as Bob Lazar says, the energy behind the propulsion and what these vehicles are using. That's the real core secret of all of this. What that means, the energy component. So
yeah, so let's hear what Richard has to say. Let's kind of wrap up on his bit.
Here, I think he's finishing up now, just touching on the final groups.
My book explores current interactions that people are having with these alien entities, including the infamous reptilians and insectoid types of beings, as well as ongoing interactions with bizarre but very human-looking beings that just seem alien, but they look human. Now, throughout all of this, believe me, I was well aware of how crazy some of this is going to sound to some readers. I'm quite aware of that. So in that sense, this was not a safe book for me to write, since I realize that I have jumped into some wild territory. Still, as I said earlier, I think this is a very useful thing to try. In my view, it comes down to something simple. If we are to acknowledge a genuine UFO phenomenon, right, something that doesn't appear to come from our civilization, and this is a conclusion I've come to for years, and it's a conclusion that many, many researchers have come to, obviously, for a long time now. So if we're going to work on that assumption, then it's very important, at least to try to get a handle on the likely scenarios of what we're dealing with. That is, who are they and what do they want? It's that simple. So as I state throughout this book, The Alien Agendas, we are at a severe handicap in understanding the answers to a lot of these questions that we want to ask. I mean, first of all, we're dealing with a phenomenon that is inherently very, very difficult for us to grasp. That's a really important thing to get a hold of here. All right, at least one and possibly all of these visitors or these others operate at very advanced levels. And it's just difficult for us to deal with that. That's the reality. And secondly, there is secrecy at all levels of what is going on here, starting with these other beings, as well as our own power establishment. And we all know that. But despite the difficulties, this is important to understand. Like, this theme is important, and this is exactly why I wrote this book. Many people don't realize that it's important because, frankly, the problem is kept far, far removed from their daily awareness. We all know this as well. Deep below the surface level of our world, of the ever-shrinking number of conversations and opinions that people are allowed to have, there is this nagging problem that is not going to go away no matter how deeply it's buried. So the title of my book, The Alien Agendas, I use the word agendas rather than agenda. I don't think that we're dealing with one single group. I think that our current state of development has prompted the whole neighborhood, the whole galactic neighborhood, to take a look at us. And not all of these other beings are necessarily bad or malevolent. And I really want to make this point. There are enough stories of people to this day who have had what they strongly believe are positive encounters with, well, some other beings. And, for a long time, I didn't personally really know what I thought about many of these types of claims. But honestly, there's just too many of them. And I personally cannot find a good reason to dismiss them out of hand. And it's also not illogical that there would be at least one group that has been here for a while and may want to help us. I don't think that that's, I think that's actually a logical assumption. And it does seem to be supported by the evidence of a number of these interactions that people have been having. And maybe the benevolent group or one of the benevolent groups is the one that's been here all along. I don't know. But there is enough diversity among these other beings that I do think we are looking at multiple groups and agendas. The main thing, I think, and which I suggest in this book, is that all of these groups are very interested in what we are now about to embark on, this transformation. As I've been saying for years, we are about to leap into their world, and I'm quite sure that they know this.
About to leap into their world.
About to leap into their world. That's a good quote.
Yeah.
Leap into their world. Yeah.
What is their world?
Well, it's almost like once the cat's out of the bag, like, if we're going on the same thread that you were talking about before, about they're watching our advancement, watching our evolution, where we're at, I think of the difference between me raising, like kids. Once I realize that they get something that I didn't previously think that they would understand, there's like this new thing where, at least for me, they've jumped a bit deeper into my world. And so I'm guiding them, but it was a jump that they made, And so it's almost, that's just the first way that I can think to explain something like that. Yeah. What he might mean by that. That's just why we need to get him on the show to ask him.
Yeah, well, and I think in a lot of ways their world is, an interstellar ability to become. We're now becoming a spacefaring species, and I mean, we're trying to just, it's still a challenge just to go to Mars. So it's not like we're really probably competing with anything close to what they have, but as space becomes more commercialized, as it becomes cheaper and easier to get a flight to go check out the moon, and maybe we put a moon base up or an outpost here soon, like, it's going to become harder and harder, I think, to suppress this. And you're going to see more cases like Commander Fravor that are just extremely well corroborated, that are extremely hard to argue with. And if we get to a point where we're being shown actual ET bodies, or an ET is actually stepping out of a craft and saying, "Hey, I'm doing a YouTube live tonight. Come check it out." Like, it's going to be hard for people to argue with that. And so, yeah, I mean, this is their world, though. Essentially, is they're already space. They're exploring space. They're exploring different species. They're at a point where they're able to really view this in a very scientific way, probably, and just sort of check in on us. So, also, their world to me is, man, like, the most exciting part of this is the culture. I mean, I couldn't imagine the type of cultural differences. Their music, their dance, their cinema. If they have these things, or
it's funny. Star Trek.
Yeah, right. This is
in the last Star Trek. There was this one. I forget, but there was this one ET that was playing music, and it was Earth music. And I remember, was it Scotty? Who was it? Maybe it was Scotty. Yeah. Was saying like, what is that noise? And they're like, oh, it's music. And it turned out it was like Beastie Boys or something like that.
Right.
And she was like, what, you don't like music? And he was like, oh, I find it kind of loud and annoying, but you know, well, I mean, like the interesting thing about that is like, so I can't go too deep into this, but there is Bwiti music. Bwiti comes from Gabon, Africa. And they've been playing this music for quite some time, and it usually is paired with a shamanic rite of passage or initiation with iboga, which is the Mount Everest of psychedelics. It can last 3 days. You could be like in bed for 3 days from it. So anyway, this music is very polyrhythmic. If you haven't listened to Tool or King Crimson, this would be completely out of your norm, and you would call this annoying, clumsy music that can't stop interrupting itself.
Right.
That's what it seems like, you know. So it's interesting you mentioned that.
Well,
I'm also interested in the culture aspect of it.
And their level of understanding music, we really perceive it. I mean, there's obviously people who use sound healing and try to really use music in a more medicinal, health-based way now. It's pretty relatively new, I'd say, though. I mean, you argue, like you said, it goes back to indigenous cultures too, but just something like that, music alone. Imagine what they're tuning their instruments at, and how much they understand what vibration and frequency does in music and these certain tones, to where maybe they can make the most incredible music that not only is the most like entertaining, pleasing ever, but also basically because it resets you, like give you like a sound bath at the same time. Like, so
Totally. You know what? We'll dive into some of that technology, because there's a lot of vibratory technology coming out now that even shows that the brain harmonizes like a symphony.
Right.
And when under psychedelics, it opens up the symphony into something far more complex. Whereas with alcohol or even just baseline default mode consciousness, it's rudimentary, let's say, a rudimentary toolkit. You know, but then it opens up into this symphony. So interesting points. Let's definitely get to the last clip with Richard Dolan and just let him finish up his point.
Take it away, Rich.
Underlying all of this massive, untold story is the question of whether this is all a good thing or a bad thing. Well, one of the things that many, not all, but many abductees talk about from their human hybrid handlers is about some sort of coming great change. If you go back on this channel and you listen to the interview I did with Dr. David Jacobs from a couple of years ago, he talks quite a bit about this. But a number of people have mentioned this, and from a number of different abduction researchers, not just David. Quite a few abductees have talked about this, that they have heard about this from the hybrids or the hybrids that they have interacted with, that there's going to be a great change coming, a great change. No one gives any details. One thing to me that is quite obvious about that is that we are going through this great change right now. This is not necessarily something that the aliens are going to be causing. It could very well, and I think this is the case, something that they knew about and is happening. We're doing the great change right now. And it's not something that's happening overnight, but it is something that's taking place over the course of a couple of generations. It's not that long in the grand scheme of things. It's happening. Our society is moving into something something totally different that's never existed before. And it's a fair question as to whether or not it's becoming literally anti-human, or at least non-human, some kind of non-human environment. It is clearly, in my view, becoming disconnected from our natural state of being. So that is a question we really want to be asking, and I do ask this. But this great change, this is the key, it seems to me. Whether it means that humans will still, maybe there's the positive aspect of it, like we'll all develop higher consciousness and higher intelligence and become peaceful and somehow better. Maybe. I don't know about that. But or maybe we're just going to be turning ourselves into one giant anthill. You can reflect on those possibilities yourself. But here's the thing. The outcome of this change matters a great deal. And this is why I conclude that one or more of these groups aren't just interested in monitoring and observing this process, but I believe quite possibly trying to manage this outcome. And this can happen through a variety of means. It can happen from quiet and strategic infiltration. It can come through some form of control or leverage over that process in any number of ways. Or it could happen by other means that I haven't even thought about, or maybe no one has thought about. It is not hard for me to imagine that some groups would want to control this process that we are going through, because it is a very powerful process with tremendous implications. What we are doing here in this transformation, as scary as it is to many of us, and it scares me, I'm not going to lie about that, but what this process is doing on one level to some people and to some groups is incredibly valuable, like literally something of great intense value. What our civilization is creating in this transformation has value to a number of people, because it is giving this species, our species, tremendous power that is coming out of this technological and ultimately societal and ultimately biological transformation, because genetic engineering is figuring into this too. So this is a powerful transition that we are going through. And that means it is potentially dangerous to other groups, and it is potentially disruptive to other groups. I'm not persuaded at all by people who say, oh, they're so far ahead of us that why would they want to worry about us at all? I don't believe that. I think what's happening is change doesn't happen on a gradual scale like this. It doesn't just go bit by bit by bit. No, it doesn't work like that. It goes bit by bit and then leaps, bit by bit and leaps, and so on. That's what these revolutions are about. That's what these transformations are. So we're in the process of a transformative, qualitative leap to something fundamentally different. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture wasn't just a little bit more of the same. No, that was a dramatic transformation. The transition from an agriculturally based society to science and industry was not just little bits and pieces here and there. No, it was a dramatic transformation, a qualitative difference. And that is what we're going through now. And that's going to take us to a substantially greater level. You think about with strong post-singularity AI, nanotech, the mind boggles at all the ways that these different technologies are going to be interacting with each other. We really cannot imagine this, but it's radically different.
There you go.
I like his style. I like his demeanor and the way he comes at this. It's pretty interesting. And that guy, I can definitely say, is one of the ones who's probably done the most meticulous research that I've seen. I'm really glad we started off with Danny Sheehan as well, because he made that point. We still most of the times find ourselves to be the center of the intellectual universe, that, we are at the apex of intelligence. And in many ways, I think that is an easy way to understand our place, because we don't have many examples of another species that can be more dominant than us. Like I do believe there's species on this planet that in some ways are far more tapped in, tuned in, orcas and dolphins. There's so much more to understand about consciousness, but we really do find ourselves to be at the forefront of intelligence in our perceivable universe. That alone will create the biggest shift if and when people can even allow themselves to believe. And this is actually where I think, allow themselves to believe that there are other intelligent entities out there, entire civilizations. I also find it very curious that at the same time we are developing what he's saying, post-singularity strong AI. That's singularity is we're not there yet, you know,
Right. Yeah.
and then post-singularity strong AI, you're really talking about something super sophisticated. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting that when you're looking at this, it'll give some people the easy out in a way. It's almost like a get out of jail free card. You can get out of this awakening if you choose not to have there's something about trust and discernment. We talked about this last time. But with all this technology, let's say we did see a video where an ET comes stepping out of a craft that landed on the White House lawn. I couldn't see 100% of people believing their eyes.
Yeah.
Their own eyes. You know,
Deep fake.
even
It's
if
deep
people
fake.
well, that's the thing. They would
Yeah.
call it a deep fake. And
Yeah.
you know what? If I only saw it on video,
Right.
I would have to really, really do my research. If I saw it with my own eyes,
Yeah.
I'm not saying all my skepticism would go, because I know sometimes that is what illusion and, you know, practical, I'm not practical magic, but, you know, I'm talking like David Blaine, you know, that kind of stuff. You can be tricked. There are tricks of the eyes, and we know how other smart humans learn those tricks of the eyes. What about an intelligent, being? Oh no, we can't believe that, because then we'd have to believe this is actually real in front of our eyes. I just wonder how many people would even allow themselves to believe something, even if they saw it, even with their own eyes. They were standing there thinking that, oh, well, it must be holographic tech or blah, blah, blah. The whole Serge Monast idea that we were talking about, Project Blue Beam, or there'll be some fake invasion. It is an interesting phenomena where I wonder what it would take. And when Charles Eisenstein was talking about all the timelines, like some people, you're looking at the same exact thing, but you decode it in a completely different way, and you can remain still skeptical. And that one anecdote, maybe I'll just get to it. I was talking earlier about Pete Evans and a camera guy, and we were all standing outside. We were there with Max Montrose. He's a cannabis aficionado, and he was pointing up, and he was like, look at that thing up there in the sky. And we started looking, and he's like, that's not a star. And I started looking. I mean, no one was saying anything, and he was like, it's not a drone. You know, it's way too high to be a drone. So I was looking at it, and every time I would see it do this little skip or a jump, the people to the right of me would be like, oh my God, there, it just happened. And then the other two, Pete Evans and my camera guy, Alex, they didn't say anything. But when we got in the car and we left, I didn't say that I saw anything, but I asked them, I was like, so what did you think of that we saw outside? Because I was a little skeptical, and they were like, what do you mean? Thought of what? And I was like, well, that object in the sky. And they were like, you mean the star? And I was like, so you didn't see it moving or jumping around or anything like that? And they're like, no, not at all. But I did. And I didn't even mention it in that moment, because I was like, what could that? Was I just so wrapped up in their moment, which I was actively being skeptical in the moment,
Right.
but was I just being wrapped up by some trick of consciousness that they were playing? Or did I see something that was available to my timeline, to my open mind, and the other two didn't, you know? And so they had a different experience growing up. They have different beliefs. They saw something different. These are all things that, it's just very curious the way that humans come to allow their worldview to change.
Right.
Because some people, they just push back no matter what. I believe something big is coming. And I think that people are going to allow Occam's razor, the most simple explanation to themselves, to be the thing that they believe. Right? Because, I mean, like people who say the earth is flat, outer space doesn't exist, it's something else out there. They would have a completely, and probably some logical trains that break down somewhere, like all of our logic, explanation for all of this. And so it's just super curious to me. I wonder what it would take for there to be a single event or series of events where critical mass starts to all think the same thing at the same time, and it's a wild opening of what is intelligence, what is out there. Are we the big kids on the block anymore?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to tie kind of a bow on all this, I mean, with how you kind of phrase it there, it makes me kind of it almost makes me feel like the only thing that would really necessarily work is some sort of peaceful, massive, global, coordinated, basically, appearance, where over every major national capital, every major state capital, there's a massive ship showing up, having beings undock, having people be able to see them. Obviously, they'd probably interact with the world leaders, but, it's a great sci-fi show, sci-fi movie I've tossed around, but essentially, how do you deal with corrupt leaders and how do you get around these corrupt systems to where we want the best possible outcome to occur? But as far as just pure validity and proving their case, I mean, one way that's working pretty effectively that we can look at that is real, that is happening now, is what happened with Commander Fravor. Just in the middle of the day during a major military exercise, go and just have fun with world-class pilots, showing the maneuvers you have in your craft, getting to their cap point before them, blocking their radar, doing all these things that the humans are then going to do the process of elimination and go, what did we just experience, guys? Because we're getting radar, we're getting human interaction, we're getting all these things that make it hard for us to say this is some sort of just advanced Chinese or Russian tech, and that's a really good way to get the discussion going. It looks like, for sure. So the next step might be something more like, okay, now you're ready for the next big thing. And maybe this is like, give them the breadcrumbs and psychologically they can handle the next step. And, if they're this advanced, we're probably not maybe the first species they've done this with. They might have a whole standardized process. And it's like, okay, now they're ready for the next thing. And now they're ready for the next thing.
Yeah.
And it's a give and take, but depending on how we respond after each little catalyst. So
I'm curious, Rick Strassman, the guy who wrote DMT, the Spirit Molecule, he had a theory that he kind of didn't go too much farther with. I met him a couple times and interviewed him, and he said that he believes the rapture, the end times, like in the Bible, the rapture would be or could be a spontaneous DMT dump for all of humanity. And I just wonder what a wild experience would do to us. That if you're almost hit by a car and then you're not, you still have a cascade of different neurochemicals. That'll change the way you experience reality in the moment. Nothing happened to your body other than a psychological preparedness for something. And that probably caused DMT, norepinephrine, adrenaline, all these different things to flood through the body. But perhaps and potentially having an experience that we can't explain does flood us with all these chemicals that we would say cause our mind to open, but it could also be a correlation, like the act of saying yes to having an experience. Also, and the placebo effect, we know, can give exact effects to what we thought we were going to have. So there could be something to what Rick was saying, that what would a great awakening not just be, but what would it feel like physiologically, somatically? How would it actually show up in the body? And I'm wondering if we were to have a mass event in this way, I kind of feel like, yeah, maybe we would all program that into our long-term memory with a brand new ratio of neurochemicals that does allow us to begin a process of, I don't know, a lot of people say that, in spiritual practices, we're working on our light body, and that Jesus was an inner alchemist. He could control the alchemy inside his body, and that's how he could produce light, right? And produce these miracles.
So the idea of chi and these things in Eastern, prana, these things of,
which both of those are just energy, let me not use that word, but they are energy impregnated with information, encoded with information, which is all energy. All energy is impregnated with information, but we also have a co-creative aspect to that. So to tie the big bow on all of this, man, we covered a lot. in this entire series. I'm really grateful for the way that you gathered all the info and the way you had it kind of lined up for all of us to watch, to take us deeper into this conversation that we've been having, because there was a lot of the stuff that I've known Richard Dolan, I've known Catherine Austin Fitts, but I haven't, gone this deep and seen some of these clips that you found. So really good on you for finding that. And I'm excited, we'll do another one of these when there is a bigger disclosure push. And next week we'll hop into Rafe Kelly, Evolve, Move, Play. And then beyond that, we'll probably have some movement trainers. And for everyone watching, this isn't to just completely bounce around. I know you guys have gotten kind of accustomed to what we've been talking about lately, but I actually even think that we need to prepare our bodies through movement. We need to prepare our minds. There's a lot that's going to be asked of us, and an enlightenment process or an awakening process involves the body, and the body needs to be in tip-top shape. And there is this idea, I'll leave on this. If you haven't checked out that Needle in the Sky New Year's Eve event, go and look up above. I posted the link in there. It's the Needle in the Sky event, New Year's Eve 2020. And the whole motif around it is cellular mitosis, the caterpillar going into the chrysalis, turning into a butterfly, DNA changing. This is the 4th stage of evolution, I really believe, that Richard Dolan was talking about. And there's something about our diets and our bodies that when your immune system is low, more stuff can be, you don't have the ability to reject something out of your body. You need your immune system to notice a foreign invader and reject it outside of your body. And so we could very potentially be going through some kind of mass experiment right now. And part of it could be standard American diet. Another part of it could be chemtrails, glyphosate that's in our drinking water. I could go on, and I don't want to start tying too many things in because I'm wrapping this up. But basically, I do think something big is coming. And I think it's cool that we've at least layered a lot of conversation around this topic. So when we do get a bit more disclosure or something does happen, you and I can hop on, even if it's not a Thursday night, and cover the story.
Yeah. And just to tie in for people a little, as you said, this was all part, we're going to have series, but we're going to start doing it similar to where you've probably seen other podcasts. Basically just we'll mix it up with different speakers based on their availability to do the podcast with us. But anytime there's somebody who's part of the Disclosure series, the Psychedelic Renaissance series, the Movement series, all the other series we'll do in the future, I will have it designed on the YouTube page where you'll be able to just click on that playlist and you can go through all the things dealing with disclosure, psychedelics, movement, any of those things. So I just started throwing up the Stewart Podcast clips, and we're going to be getting all the other podcasts we've done up, and continue to have little short digestible bits of the podcast as well for people, because I know sometimes it's hard to watch the full thing. But I appreciate you, brother, and I was honored to do this. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, dude. Well, you did a great job. And in the course of this show, we got a lot of really great comments. We got Mike George, who's been tuning in like a fiend lately, and he donated $4.99. And we also got a moderate. What was it? A moderate rebel. Somebody joined the moderate rebel on YouTube. All of you listening, you can do that. I highly encourage you to go to benjosephstewart.com. Eventually, I'd like to, there's deeper dives there that you won't get on YouTube. And there will also be, with some really good guests, we will be doing some extra footage at the end of things that, maybe are too sensitive for YouTube, and also just some really cool content that we can put at the member section of Ben Joseph Stewart. So go to check out benjosephstewart.com. I appreciate everyone who's commented.
The Discord
and the Discord
off.
chat.
Yeah, it's really thriving right now.
It really is. There's a lot of really good conversations there. And every time I put out a Waking Infinity News, somebody comments and says something, hey, man, I'm really liking this, that, and the other. Get in touch, reach out with the people there. Let's start the conversation on these things, because I really feel like the nuances we're touching upon here are very comprehensive and relevant to how we can approach what's coming without even fully knowing what's coming and be in tip-top mental, physical, and spiritual shape. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining me. We're all on the same path together. The best thing we can do is learn how to hold forgiveness in our hearts, because forgiveness doesn't let other people off the hook. It lets our heart off of the attachment. To learn how to love unconditionally and to really trust your intuition and trust your insights. Because even if you hear people contradicting thoughts and beliefs that you have, it doesn't mean that they're wrong, even if you believe something different. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong. We all have something special and a special voice that we need to be bringing to the world right now. It's not about being right in that one supposed objective reality. It's more about being true to yourself. That's what we welcome here. We welcome all kinds of dissension. Please dissent to your heart's delight. And this is going to be a podcast that has incredible conversations like this and in many other topics. So I want to thank you all once again. Thanks for joining the Ben Stewart Podcast.